Welcome to Ryan's Running Reviews in partnership with Roadrunner Sports, and today we're taking a look at a shoe that is literally called the More because it has more foam than all other New Balance running shoes. It's the More V5. We're also going to compare it to last year's version, V4, to see what changed. Let's roll with it. Before we get started, I do want to say these shoes were provided to me by Roadrunner Sports. However, no one had a chance to preview this video, and this file synopsis is my own. I'd also like to say please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing. Here we go. The New Balance More series, as the name obviously implies, is their Ultra Max Cushion neutral road running shoe designed for runners that want the most amount of stack height possible, just a ton of protection underfoot. There's no plate or anything like that. This is not the fastest shoe. It's really probably easier for those recovery days or longer runs. You just have a ton of foam between you and the ground, which again, that's why the shoe is called the More. I really do like this particular line, and they did make some big changes compared to last year, mainly because the 1080, which is New Balance's more premium conventional neutral daily trainer, almost had the same stack height as the More V4. So of course, here on the More V5, they had to make things much larger. Last year on the More V4, we had 35 millimeters in the heel and 31 in the forefoot for a low 4 millimeter drop. That has been drastically changed this year, as the More V5 now has a whopping 43 millimeters in the heel and 39 in the forefoot for that same 4 millimeter drop. Now, that means you have more cushioning in the forefoot of this new shoe compared to the heel of last year. So you can tell they just added a ton of foam here. The price does go up slightly. Last year it was $150 and this year it is $155. The weight does go up slightly as well, from 10.6 ounces now to 10.7. So a very small change in weight, and that's quite impressive considering we have almost 8 more millimeters of stack height added to this new shoe. Moving on to the uppers, both shoes did fit true to size for me and were rather accommodating through the midfoot and toe box, which I am very happy to see. One minor thing I do want to note is I do think the More V4 has slightly better breathability, mainly because on the More V5 we have 2 layers of material, an outer engineered mesh layer and then an internal fabric liner, which connects directly to the tongue. So last year you just had one engineered mesh layer, and that does help with the overall ventilation. The tongue itself is fully gusseted and has a little bit more padding, which I do appreciate, especially because last year the tongue here was rather thin and not gusseted, and it tended to move around a lot. The edges of the tongue would sometimes get rolled up, and you kind of had to take an extra minute to get it to lay flat, and that is kind of a problem that does not exist on the More V5. You put your foot into the shoe and you are ready to go. I don't mind the fact that they added some more padding, especially because the weight only slightly went up by like 1/10 of an ounce, which is pretty much nothing. They also added more padding in the ankle and Achilles section. Thought the lockdown was solid. The heel counter is moderately stiff, about the same as last year. Really did not have an issue with the lockdown at all. It's a quite substantial, high quality upper, and I think that if you have a normal or slightly wider foot, you will like this. If you do have a more narrow foot, you might find this to be a bit too wide. But otherwise, I really like what New Balance is doing with the upper, especially with the changes to the tongue. And again, the one, I guess, maybe one drawback is the breathability does take a small hit. But otherwise, the upper here is incredibly luxurious and comfortable, which is what you want out of your super thick, easy daily trainer. The midsoles clearly look very different, and on paper, they're both technically Fresh Foam X. However, I can absolutely confirm that this version of Fresh Foam X is significantly softer and squishier compared to prior versions. Now, New Balance is kind of showing their evolution of Fresh Foam X. They have this kind of insert in the More V5 that says they've been innovating since 2014, and that's clearly the case. I wish maybe they put like a number on it, like, hey, this is Fresh Foam X V6 or whatever it is, instead of just calling it Fresh Foam X, because all Fresh Foam X apparently is not created equal, and that is evident by this new More model. Now, for me, this is going to be, it feels like a less dense Fresh Foam X, and I think that makes sense because the shoes weigh roughly the same. However, you have 8 more millimeters of stack height here in this 5th version. So I think that weight savings comes by making the foam just less dense overall. Like I said before, it's a very squishy and soft foam that, in my opinion, is more focused on impact protection than energy return. It's nowhere near as bouncy compared to the fuel cell PIBA-based foams we see on their kind of racing and up-tempo series like the Elite, the Rebel, and the Trainer. So keep that in mind. This Fresh Foam series feels a little bit more focused just on giving you that underfoot protection with a very soft setup, especially in the More V5. On top of the midsole getting larger, there's one piece of the midsole geometry which is important to talk about, and that is the fact that on the More V4, you had this kind of carved out section directly under your heel, which allowed for easier compression and a softer heel section, which for me made the shoe feel a little bit more closer to like a zero or negative drop, because you had a kind of, again, carved out heel and a filled in forefoot. That has been changed this year. They filled in the heel section, which I'm happy to see. I also think that's important because, like I talked about before, this is a much squishier foam, and I think you do need that heel section to be filled in for additional support. And much like we saw on the More V4, there are a couple stability features that kind of help wrangle in this foam. I wouldn't necessarily say this is the most stable Ultramax cushion neutral daily trainer. If you really do happen to overpronate or kind of supinate, you might want to go in a different direction. This foam is incredibly soft. But what New Balance did to kind of help you manage this large midsole is, one, give you a wide platform. You just have a ton of surface area to land on. It is wider compared to last year, which makes sense because the foam is softer, so it makes sense that they would increase the overall platform. You also have these kind of mini foam sidewalls, so your foot actually sits kind of within the midsole. The same thing we saw last year, except the walls of foam were a bit closer towards the midfoot, and that does help give you an extra bit of support and guidance with this massive platform. Overall, when it comes to the performance of these two shoes, I think the identity and purpose of the More has completely shifted in the V5. In my experience, the More V4 is the more versatile shoe. It's a little bit easier to pick up the pace in, mainly because you have a more dense midsole foam that's nowhere near soft compared to V5, and the platform is less bulky with a more approachable stack height. This is by no means a fast shoe, but it is easier to pick up the pace here in the V4 compared to the V5. And while the V5 might not be the fastest Ultramax cushion shoe out there, and it is very bulky, the shoe is just massive, I think this is one of the more, dare I say, fun and interesting Ultramax cushion shoes to use, just because this midsole foam is so soft and unique. Not the most energetic midsole foam out there, like I talked about. Fuel Cell, definitely a lot more pop to it. This feels like you get a ton of impact protection and just a ton of squish underfoot. Really good for those easy runs, or if you're just going out for a long cruiser of a run. This is a shoe that I think it just makes for a super enjoyable experience. One kind of interesting thing I do want to say is that because this midsole foam is so large and soft, this may just be a Ryan problem, but for the first few runs while I was getting used to it, the muscles in my feet were actually kind of tired because you're kind of having to work through this really large platform, and it took me a couple runs to get used to that. But otherwise, this provides a really unique experience. It's just a nice, soft, luxurious ride is the best way to put it. Yes, it really can't pick up the pace, even though they did add these kind of vertical rubber outsole lines, which do stiffen up the forefoot just a bit. And it is a fairly rigid shoe, but it's not the easiest to really push things on, especially when you compare it to the previous edition. However, like I said before, this is just a fun, luxurious, soft ride. I think it really lends itself to runners that want just a pleasant, easy cruiser of a daily trainer. If you're someone who's disappointed that the More V5 lost some of its versatility, I would tell you to go look at the 1080, as it has almost the same stack height as the V4, yet a similar kind of foam to what we see in the V5, giving you a really nice, well-cushioned yet versatile experience underfoot. And if that's not enough for you and you really want something even lighter and faster, I really do like the Rebel. It punches well above its stack height and is incredibly comfortable. Well, that concludes the review. Let me know in the comments what you think of this complete redesign to the More series. I would love to hear from you. I'm Ryan from Ryan's Running Reviews, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.